Sarah Martinez laughed, actually laughed, as she signed the divorce papers in Judge Morrison's courtroom, her pen gliding across the final page with the same casual confidence she'd shown when her husband of 12 years, David, caught her in bed with Marcus Chen, the VP of sales at TechNova Industries, where she worked. She was a senior marketing executive pulling $180,000 a year, and David? He was just the IT guy she'd married before her career took off, the quiet, boring husband who worked from their basement, barely making what she spent on her monthly shopping trips. But as the judge began reading the asset disclosure, Sarah's smirk froze when she heard TechNova Industries listed under David's holdings. Then her heart stopped completely when Judge Morrison announced his net worth, $4.7 billion. The same multi-billion-dollar company she'd been working for, climbing the corporate ladder, bragging to Marcus about her power and status, her husband owned it all. Yet what David did next, the decision he made in that courtroom while Sarah's face drained of all color and her cheating boyfriend Marcus turned pale with recognition, wasn't what anyone expected from a betrayed billionaire. Would he destroy her career with a single phone call? Would he expose her affair to the entire company she'd built her reputation in? Or was there something far more calculated, more devastating than revenge waiting in the empire she never knew, belonged to the man whose heart she'd shattered? And why had he hidden his true identity from his own wife for over a decade? The courthouse hallway smelled of floor polish and broken promises. David Chen sat in his wheelchair, fingers drumming against the armrest, watching Sarah pace near the water fountain, her Louboutin heels clicking against the marble floor with that familiar rhythm of entitlement. She was on her phone, probably texting Marcus, his former best friend, his college roommate, the man he'd trusted with everything, the man he'd given a VP position to at TechNova, the man who'd stolen his wife and convinced her to steal from him. David's attorney, Patricia Huang, sat beside him reviewing documents. But David wasn't looking at papers. He was remembering. 12 years ago, he'd been whole, walking, running, building an empire from a Stanford dorm room while Sarah worked as a junior marketing coordinator at a startup that failed within months. He'd fallen for her ambition, her drive, her fire. They'd married quickly, passionately, with dreams of building something together. Then came the car accident 8 years ago, the one that shattered his spine and confined him to this chair. The one that changed everything. Marcus had been there at the hospital, holding Sarah's hand, telling David he'd help with anything they needed. Such a good friend, such a loyal brother. David had believed him. He'd trusted Marcus when he said he'd look after Sarah during those dark months of rehabilitation. He'd even felt grateful when Marcus started spending more time at their house, helping Sarah with groceries, with bills, with the loneliness David knew he was causing because he was too focused on physical therapy, too angry at his broken body, too absent even when he was in the room. Patricia touched his arm. "They're ready for us." Sarah glanced over. And for just a moment, David saw something flicker across her face. Was it guilt? No, probably just annoyance that this was taking so long. She'd made it clear for the past 6 months that she wanted out. The discovery had been accidental, almost comically so. David had been trying to pay their landscaper from their shared account, the one they'd maintained throughout their marriage, when he noticed the balance was nearly zero. Strange, considering he'd deposited $50,000 just 3 months earlier for household expenses. He dug deeper, called the bank, requested statements. What he found made his blood run cold. Over the past 8 years, Sarah had transferred over $380,000 from their shared account to Marcus Chen. Small amounts at first, $500 here, $1,000 there. Rent payments, she'd labeled them. Helping Marcus with his startup costs, she'd explained when David had asked about an early transfer years ago, back when he was still naive enough to believe her. Business investments, emergency loans to a dear friend, but the transfers had grown bolder. $5,000, $10,000, $25,000 at a time. The notes became less creative. For MC rent, Marcus. She'd stopped hiding it because she'd stopped thinking David would ever check. Why would he? He was just the crippled husband working from their basement, managing what she assumed was some mid-level IT consulting business. She had no idea that basement office was the nerve center of a multi-billion-dollar technology empire, that the client calls he took were with Fortune 500 CEOs, that the boring IT work was orchestrating deals that moved markets. David rolled himself toward the courtroom, and Sarah fell into step beside him, her expression carefully neutral. She'd perfected that look, the dutiful wife performing her final obligation. Patricia held the door, and they entered Judge Morrison's domain, a wood-paneled room that smelled of old law books and older grudges. "Mrs. Martinez," the judge said, peering over her reading glasses, "you seem eager to finalize this divorce?" "Yes, Your Honor," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "It's time we both move forward with our lives." David said nothing. He'd learned the power of silence over these past 8 years, the strength that came from watching, waiting, knowing. Sarah had no idea what was coming. Neither did Marcus, who'd taken a sudden vacation day from TechNova, probably at Sarah's urging, worried he might somehow be implicated in the divorce proceedings. Smart man, not smart enough. Judge Morrison shuffled papers, and David caught Sarah sneaking a glance at her phone. Probably another text from Marcus. Perhaps they were planning their future together, the one they'd been building with David's money, in David's company, under David's nose. The apartment Marcus rented downtown, David's money. The startup Marcus had tried to launch 3 years ago that failed spectacularly, David's money. The BMW Marcus drove, registration showed a hefty down payment, made the same week Sarah had transferred $35,000 from their shared account. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was sitting in a folder in Patricia's briefcase, marked simply DNA results. David's hands tightened on his wheelchair. Not yet. First, let her sign. Let her think she'd won. The memory hit David like a physical blow as he watched Sarah fidget with her designer pen. 3 children, Emma, 10 years old, the twins, Lucas and Sophie, 8. They were upstairs at Sarah's mother's house right now, probably wondering why Daddy hadn't called, why he'd moved out so suddenly 3 months ago. They didn't know. God, they didn't know anything yet. David's mind drifted back to 8 years ago, right after the accident. He'd been in rehabilitation, learning to navigate life in a wheelchair, when Sarah announced she was pregnant. He'd cried, actually cried, tears of joy mixed with fear. How would he be a father like this? How would he chase a toddler, play catch, teach them to ride a bike? But Sarah had kissed his forehead and promised they'd figure it out together. Emma was born 7 months later, a beautiful baby girl with dark eyes and Marcus's distinctive cleft chin. David hadn't noticed then. He'd been too overwhelmed with new fatherhood, too focused on building TechNova into something sustainable, too trusting. The twins came 2 years later. Another surprise pregnancy, Sarah had said. Another blessing. Lucas had Marcus's nose, that sharp Roman profile. Sophie had his widow's peak. But David had been blind, wrapped up in love and trust in the exhausting work of running a secret empire while pretending to be a struggling IT consultant. He changed diapers from his wheelchair, fed bottles at 3 in the morning, read bedtime stories, helped with homework, attended every school play and parent-teacher conference Sarah was too busy to make. He'd been their father in every way that mattered, except biology, except blood, except truth. The DNA test had been Patricia's idea, suggested during one of their early divorce consultations. Given the financial transfers and the timeline, she'd said carefully, we should be thorough. David had resisted at first, not his children, not Emma, who called him daddy and climbed into his lap to watch cartoons, not Lucas, who'd asked for a wheelchair for Christmas last year because he wanted to be just like Dad. Not Sophie, who drew pictures of their family with David always in the center, always smiling. But Patricia had pressed, and David had finally agreed. Hair samples from their brushes, sent to a private lab with rush processing. The results came back on a Tuesday, delivered to Patricia's office in a manila envelope that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. 0 probability of paternity. All 3 children. Emma, Lucas, Sophie, none of them were his. David had sat in Patricia's office for an hour, staring at the reports, feeling something inside him crack and then shatter. Sarah had gotten pregnant 3 times in 8 years. 3 times she'd let him believe the children were his. 3 times she'd watched him bond with babies who carried Marcus's DNA, not his. 3 times she'd lied to his face while he fell more deeply in love with children who would never truly be his own. "Mr. Chen," Judge Morrison said, pulling David back to the present, "do you contest any of the terms outlined in the divorce petition?" "No, Your Honor," David said quietly. "I want this marriage dissolved as much as my wife does." Sarah shot him a surprised look. She'd expected him to drag this out, to fight for scraps, to beg for more time. She had no idea he'd been preparing for this moment for 6 months, ever since he'd discovered the first transfer to Marcus. 6 months of investigation, documentation, evidence gathering. 6 months of pretending everything was fine while his world disintegrated. 6 months of coming home to children who called him dad while knowing they never should have. Judge Morrison continued reading. The petitioner requests full custody of the 3 minor children, with respondent granted supervised visitation every other weekend. The petitioner also requests the marital home, valued at $1.2 million, and 50% of all shared assets and accounts. She looked up. "Mr. Chen, do you agree to these terms?" David's lawyer leaned forward. "Your Honor, my client has a counter-proposal regarding the custody arrangement and asset division. But first, we'd like to present evidence relevant to the proceedings." Sarah stiffened. "What evidence?" "We agreed to keep this simple." "You agreed," Patricia said coolly. "My client has discovered several material facts that impact the settlement." She pulled out a thick folder. Financial records showing unauthorized transfers from a shared marital account totaling $380,000 over 8 years. All payments made to Marcus Chen. The color drained from Sarah's face. Those were loans. Loans to a friend. David knew about them. "Did he?" Patricia opened the folder, revealing bank statements highlighted in yellow. "According to our investigation, you labeled many of these transfers as household expenses and emergency repairs. You told your husband Marcus needed temporary help, yet the payments continued for nearly a decade. Our forensic accountant has traced these funds to rent payments for Mr. Chen's apartment, investment in his failed business ventures, and the down payment on his vehicle." Sarah's attorney, a young man named Brandon, who looked increasingly uncomfortable, cleared his throat. "Your Honor, gifts between friends aren't illegal, even if the amounts are substantial." "True," Patricia agreed, "but fraudulent transfers from a shared marital account without the other spouse's informed consent can be considered dissipation of marital assets, which brings us to our second piece of evidence." Patricia pulled out 3 sets of documents, each paper clipped separately, each one a bomb waiting to detonate Sarah's carefully constructed world. David watched his wife's face, searching for any sign of remorse, any flicker of the woman he'd fallen in love with 12 years ago. He saw only calculation, the wheels turning as she tried to figure out how much he knew and how bad this was about to get. Judge Morrison accepted the documents, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp. She'd been on the bench for 23 years and had seen every variation of human betrayal. This case, David suspected, was about to earn a spot in her top 10. "DNA paternity tests," Patricia said, her voice professional but not unkind, "conducted on all 3 children listed in the custody petition. Emma Chen, age 10, Lucas and Sophie Chen, age 8. The results show 0 probability of biological paternity between the children and my client, David Chen." The courtroom went silent. Sarah's face transformed through a series of emotions: shock, fear, anger, then a desperate attempt at composure. Her attorney dropped his pen. The court reporter's fingers froze over her stenotype machine. Even Judge Morrison, who'd probably thought she'd seen everything, blinked twice. Those tests are wrong," Sarah stammered. "They have to be wrong. David is their father. He's been their father since they were born. Genetically, he is not," Patricia continued. "However, my client has been the sole emotional and financial provider for these children throughout their lives. He's attended every school event, every doctor's appointment, every midnight feeding, and every scraped knee. He loves them deeply, which is why this betrayal is particularly devastating." David's jaw clenched. He wouldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of her. He'd done his crying alone in his office at TechNova's headquarters, in the corner suite Sarah didn't know he owned, looking out over the city they'd once planned to conquer together. He'd cried for the children who'd never really been his, for the decade of lies, for the fool he'd been. Sarah found her voice. "David, please, we can talk about this. This doesn't have to be revealed in court," David interrupted, his voice colder than she'd ever heard it. "Be discussed in front of a judge? Be documented in legal records?" He leaned forward in his wheelchair. "You took my money to fund your affair with my best friend. You used our shared account like your personal ATM to support the man you were sleeping with. And you got pregnant 3 times. 3 times, Sarah. And let me believe those children were mine. Let me bond with them, love them, raise them. Did you laugh about it? Did you and Marcus joke about the crippled husband who had no idea?" "It wasn't like that," Sarah whispered, but her eyes told a different story. Guilt, yes, but also anger at being caught. Frustration that her comfortable arrangement was falling apart. Judge Morrison set down the documents. "Mrs. Martinez, these are serious allegations. Do you contest the validity of these DNA tests?" Sarah's attorney whispered urgently in her ear. She shook her head, and David saw the moment she decided to pivot, to try a different strategy. "Your Honor, regardless of biology, David has been their legal father for years. He's on all their birth certificates. He has parental rights and responsibilities that can't just be erased." "Actually," Patricia interjected, "paternity fraud is grounds for disestablishing paternity in this state. My client has every right to contest his legal status as father to these children, especially given that the biological father is a known party, Marcus Chen, your current romantic partner and the recipient of nearly $400,000 in marital funds." The pieces clicked together in Judge Morrison's expression. "You've been having an affair with Marcus Chen for how long?" 8 years, David answered when Sarah remained silent. "Since right after my accident. Maybe before, I'm not sure anymore. I trusted him. I gave him a job, a career. I made him VP of sales at TechNova Industries, and he repaid me by sleeping with my wife and fathering children she claimed were mine." Sarah's head snapped up. "Wait, you gave Marcus his job? What are you talking about? You don't work at TechNova. You do IT consulting from our basement." And there it was. The moment David had been waiting for, dreading, needing. Patricia smiled, a small professional curve of her lips that held absolutely no warmth. She pulled out another folder, this one significantly thicker. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence documentation proving my client's ownership and operational control of TechNova Industries. Business registration, stock certificates, board minutes, everything." Judge Morrison accepted the folder, and David watched Sarah's face as the judge began reading. Confusion first, then disbelief, then a dawning horror that would have been satisfying if David wasn't so exhausted, so heartbroken, so fundamentally destroyed by the woman he'd loved. The flashback came unbidden. David was 23, sitting in a Stanford computer lab at 2 a.m. with Marcus beside him, both of them running on Red Bull and ambition. They were coding the first prototype of what would become TechNova's flagship product, a cloud-based security platform that would revolutionize how companies protected their data. Marcus was the business mind, full of ideas about marketing and sales. David was the technical genius, the one who could see problems in code like other people saw colors. "When we make it big," Marcus had said that night, "we're splitting everything 50-50. Brothers for life, right?" David had bumped his fist. Brothers for life. But when the company started gaining traction, when venture capitalists came calling with term sheets and valuations, Marcus had gotten cold feet. "I can't do this," he'd said. "It's too risky. I have student loans, family obligations. I need a steady paycheck." So David had bought him out, paid Marcus $50,000 for his share of a company that would eventually be worth billions. Marcus had seemed relieved, grateful even. He'd taken a corporate job at a tech firm, sent David encouraging texts about the startup grind, remained his best friend through it all. Then came the accident. David's car T-boned by a drunk driver running a red light, his spine shattered at T12, his life permanently altered. Marcus had visited him every day in the hospital, held Sarah when she broke down crying, promised to help however he could. And David, grateful and vulnerable and desperate for normalcy, had offered Marcus a job at TechNova when he was healthy enough to return to work. VP of Sales, a generous salary, stock options that would be worth millions someday. He'd never told Sarah the truth about TechNova. In the beginning, it was because the company was fragile and he didn't want to jinx it. Then it became a test. Would she love him or for his money? After the accident, it became armor. She'd stayed with him when he was broken, wheelchair-bound, dependent. That had to mean something, right? That had to prove her love was real. Except it wasn't. She'd stayed because the house was paid off, because his IT consulting provided a comfortable life, because leaving a disabled husband looked bad, and she'd entertained herself with Marcus, funded their affair with David's money, created a whole family with the man who'd once been David's brother. Mr. Chen, Judge Morrison said, breaking through his memories, these documents show you are the founder, majority shareholder, and CEO of TechNova Industries, the company that employs your wife. And her boyfriend, David added. I hired Marcus 8 years ago, right after my accident. Gave him a VP position, competitive salary, the whole package. I thought I was helping an old friend. Turns out I was paying the man who was sleeping with my wife and fathering children she pretended were mine. Sarah stood up abruptly. I need a break. Your Honor, can we take a recess? Sit down, Mrs. Martinez, Judge Morrison said firmly. We're going to get through this. She turned to David. If you're the CEO of TechNova, why did you hide this from your wife? It was a fair question, one David had asked himself countless times. After my accident, I was vulnerable, depressed. I wondered if people would treat me differently, if Sarah would see me differently. So I kept running the company from home, told everyone I was doing IT consulting. I wanted to know I was loved for who I was, not what I owned. He laughed bitterly. Ironic, isn't it? I was testing her loyalty while she was stealing from me and sleeping with my best friend. Patricia pulled out yet another document. Your Honor, there's more. Security footage from TechNova's executive floor, dated over the past 3 years. The company recently upgraded its surveillance systems, and my client reviewed archived footage as part of his divorce preparation. What kind of footage? The judge asked. Video evidence of Mrs. Martinez and Mr. Chen engaging in inappropriate behavior in Mr. Chen's office, on company property, during work hours, approximately 47 instances documented. Patricia's voice remained professional, but David heard the disgust underneath. Even his attorney, who'd handled hundreds of divorce cases, found this one particularly egregious. Sarah's face went white. You've been spying on me? I've been protecting my company, David corrected. Those surveillance systems are legal and disclosed to all employees. You signed the acknowledgement when you were hired. You just never imagined your husband was the CEO watching the footage. The beautiful symmetry of it would have made David smile if his heart wasn't breaking. Sarah had climbed the corporate ladder at TechNova, never knowing she was working for her husband. She'd impressed managers who reported to David. She'd earned promotions that David had to approve. She'd probably bragged to Marcus about her career success, her independence, her ability to make it on her own merit. And all of it, every single achievement, had happened in a company David built, that David owned, that David controlled. Marcus had known, of course. Not at first, maybe, but eventually. David remembered the moment he told Marcus the truth about TechNova, about 5 years ago during a late-night call. Marcus had gone quiet, asked strange questions about the company structure, about Sarah's knowledge. David had thought his friend was just surprised, maybe a little hurt that David hadn't been fully honest. Now he understood. Marcus had realized he was seducing the wife of the man who employed him, who paid his salary, who held his entire career in his hands, and Marcus had done it anyway. Judge Morrison removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. This is, without question, one of the most complex and disturbing cases I've handled this year. She looked at Sarah. Mrs. Martinez, do you understand the severity of what you've done? Setting aside the moral implications, you've committed paternity fraud, dissipation of marital assets, and potentially criminal fraud depending on how we interpret those financial transfers. Sarah's attorney jumped in. Your Honor, my client made mistakes, but criminal charges seem excessive. This is a domestic matter. A marriage that broke down. People make poor choices during difficult times. Difficult times? David's voice cracked with emotion for the first time. I was in a wheelchair, working 16-hour days to build a company that would secure our future, while my wife was in bed with my best friend creating a secret family. Those children upstairs, they call me Dad. Emma drew me a Father's Day card last year that said, "Best Daddy in the World." Lucas asked me last month to teach him about computers because he wants to be like me when he grows up. Sophie tells people her daddy is a superhero because I use a wheelchair and still do everything. He paused, tears threatening despite his best efforts. I love those kids more than anything in this world, and now I have to live with the knowledge that they're not mine, that every milestone was built in a lie, that the two people I trusted most betrayed me in the cruelest way possible. So don't talk to me about difficult times or poor choices. This wasn't a mistake. This was systematic, calculated deception spanning nearly a decade. The courtroom was silent. Even Sarah's attorney looked uncomfortable, shuffling papers without meeting anyone's eyes. Judge Morrison's expression had softened slightly, the professional mask cracking to show genuine sympathy. "What do you want, Mr. Chen?" the judge asked quietly. "In terms of custody, assets, everything." David had thought about this question for 6 months. He'd wargamed every scenario with Patricia, considered every angle, explored every possible outcome. Part of him wanted to destroy Sarah completely, fire her from TechNova, blackball her in the tech industry, sue for the return of every penny she'd stolen. Another part, the part that still remembered falling in love with an ambitious young woman with fire in her eyes, wanted to just walk away and try to forget any of this had happened. But there was a third part, the part that had held Emma through nightmares and taught Lucas to tie his shoes and braided Sophie's hair before school. That part couldn't just abandon the children, even if they weren't biologically his. They didn't ask to be born into this mess. They didn't deserve to be collateral damage in their mother's betrayal. "I want the truth," David said finally. "I want those children to know who their biological father is. They deserve that, even if it's painful. I want Marcus Chen terminated from TechNova Industries effective immediately, with cause, forfeiting all stock options and bonuses. I want reimbursement of the $380,000 Sarah stole from our shared account, plus interest. And I want to be free from this marriage legally, financially, and emotionally." "What about the children?" Judge Morrison pressed. "You can disestablish paternity, refuse any parental rights or responsibilities. You could walk away clean." David closed his eyes. He'd thought about this constantly, the idea of just cutting ties completely, starting over somewhere far away from the memories and pain. But every time he imagined it, he saw Emma's face when he told her he wasn't coming back. Lucas's confusion when he asked why Daddy didn't love them anymore. Sophie's tears when she realized her superhero was abandoning her. "I want them to know the truth about their biological parentage," he repeated, "but I also want them to know I love them, that I chose to be their father, even if genetics didn't make me one. I'll step back, give them space to process and to build a relationship with Marcus if that's what they want, but I won't disappear." "I can't," Sarah finally spoke, her voice small and broken. "They'll hate me. When they find out what I did, Emma and Lucas and Sophie will hate me forever." "Probably," David agreed, "but that's not my problem anymore. You created this situation. You lied to them every single day of their lives. You owe them the truth, and you owe them the chance to decide who they want in their lives moving forward." Patricia pulled out another document. "Your Honor, my client is also requesting that the asset disclosure be read into the record. Mrs. Martinez signed the divorce petition under the impression that marital assets totaled approximately $2 million. The house, some retirement accounts, savings. She's unaware of the full extent of my client's wealth." Sarah's head snapped up. "What does that mean? What full extent?" "It means," David said calmly, "that when you laughed while signing those divorce papers, when you mentally calculated how much money you'd get in the settlement, you were working with incomplete information." Judge Morrison picked up the asset disclosure document, her eyebrows rising as she scanned the pages. "Mr. Chen, is this accurate? Your net worth is listed as $4.7 billion? The number hung in the air like a thunderclap. Sarah's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her attorney actually stood up, leaned over to look at the document, then sat back down heavily. Yes, Your Honor, David confirmed. TechNova Industries is currently valued at $8.2 billion. I own 58% of the company, along with various real estate holdings, investment portfolios, and other assets. The total net worth is accurate as of last quarter. Sarah's laugh when it came was high and slightly hysterical. No, that's not possible. You work from our basement. You make maybe $150,000 a year doing IT consulting. You drive a 7-year-old Honda. We shop at Target. I've been paying for half our groceries because you said money was tight. Money was never tight, David said. I just wanted to live a normal life. I wanted a wife who loved me for me, not for my bank account. I wanted to raise children who understood the value of hard work and humility. He stopped, shook his head. It doesn't matter what I wanted. What I got was a wife who stole from me, cheated on me, and lied about the paternity of 3 children. So here we are. The math was probably happening in Sarah's head right now, David thought. If marital assets were $4.7 billion, even a modest settlement would be hundreds of millions of dollars. More money than she'd dreamed of, more than her $180,000 salary could earn in multiple lifetimes. She thought she was leaving a struggling IT consultant for a VP of sales. She thought she was trading up, moving on to better prospects with Marcus. Instead, she'd just blown up her marriage to a billionaire. A billionaire who owned the company where she'd built her entire career. A billionaire who employed her boyfriend. A billionaire who had documented evidence of her fraud, her affair, and her paternity deception. The horror dawning on Sarah's face would have been satisfying if David wasn't so tired, so heartbroken, so fundamentally exhausted by the entire situation. However, Patricia continued, my client is not seeking to leave Mrs. Martinez destitute, despite her actions. He's proposing a settlement that takes into account the length of the marriage and Mrs. Martinez's contributions to the household, while also accounting for her dissipation of marital assets and fraudulent behavior. She slid a document across to Sarah's attorney. My client is offering a one-time payment of $2 million, the marital home, and his car. In exchange, Mrs. Martinez waives all rights to any other assets, including future earnings from TechNova Industries. She also agrees to return the $380,000 stolen from the shared account, which will be deducted from the $2 million settlement, leaving her with $1.62 million. Brandon, Sarah's attorney, scanned the document. $1.62 million from a $4.7 billion estate? That's less than 1%. No judge would approve such a disproportionate settlement. Most betrayed spouses don't get anything, Patricia countered. The stolen money alone gives my client grounds to pursue criminal charges. The paternity fraud could result in lawsuits for emotional distress. The affair with a subordinate employee creates potential liability issues for Mrs. Martinez at TechNova. Sexual harassment policies apply regardless of gender. My client is being extraordinarily generous given the circumstances. Judge Morrison studied the proposed settlement. Mrs. Martinez, you need to understand something. If this goes to trial, everything will become public record. Your employer, your husband's company, will have full documentation of your affair with a subordinate. The DNA evidence will be submitted. The financial transfers will be examined. Your reputation, your career, your relationship with your children, all of it will be destroyed in open court. She paused, letting that sink in. Mr. Chen is offering you a way out that preserves some dignity, provides financial security, and keeps the worst details private. I strongly suggest you consider it carefully. Sarah looked at Marcus's contact in her phone, probably wanting to call him, to strategize, to figure out how to salvage this disaster. But Marcus wasn't going to help her. Marcus was probably already updating his resume, trying to figure out how to explain to future employers why he was terminated from a VP position at a major tech company. Marcus was smart enough to know that David could destroy him with a single phone call to anyone in the industry. What about my job? Sarah asked finally. I've worked at TechNova for 6 years. I've earned my position. You can't just fire me because we're getting divorced. David leaned forward. Actually, I can fire you for having an inappropriate relationship with a superior, for using company property to conduct an affair, and for creating a hostile work environment. We have 47 instances documented on video, Sarah. 47 times you and Marcus thought you were alone in his office. The company handbook is very clear about fraternization policies. He watched her process this, watched her mental calculations shift and reform. 6 years of career building, gone. Her reputation in the industry, destroyed. Her relationship with Marcus, forever tainted by the knowledge that they'd both been employees of the man whose wife and children Marcus had stolen. There was no good outcome here for Sarah, only degrees of disaster. "I need to talk to Marcus," Sarah said. "Before I sign anything, I need to talk to him." "By all means," David agreed, "but you should know, Marcus is being served with termination papers this afternoon. He's also being named as co-respondent in the divorce, which means his role in this will be public record regardless of whether this goes to trial. Any future employer who Googles him will find out he had an affair with his boss's wife, fathered 3 children with her while she was married, and accepted nearly $400,000 from her through fraudulent means." Patricia added, "We're also considering a civil suit against Mr. Chen for alienation of affection, though Washington state doesn't recognize that tort. However, we are pursuing recovery of the stolen funds through him as well, which means his assets will be frozen pending resolution." Sarah's phone buzzed. She looked at it, and David saw Marcus's name on the screen. She didn't answer. 3 months later, David sat in his corner office at TechNova's headquarters, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the Seattle skyline. The divorce was finalized. Sarah had signed the settlement, taken her $1.62 million, and moved into a condo downtown with Marcus. She'd resigned from TechNova rather than face termination, spinning a story about pursuing new opportunities that fooled exactly no one who mattered. Emma, Lucas, and Sophie knew the truth now. David had insisted on family therapy, on age-appropriate explanations facilitated by professionals. Emma had cried for days, angry at her mother, but also confused about David's role. "You're still my dad," she told him during one session. "Biology is just science. You're my real dad because you chose me." Lucas had been quieter, processing internally. He'd asked if he could still call David dad, and David had said yes while trying not to cry. Sophie, the youngest, didn't fully understand yet. She knew Marcus was her biological father, but still reached for David first when she was scared or hurt or needed help with homework. Marcus had sent one email, a long, rambling message full of apologies and excuses and justifications. David had deleted it without finishing. Marcus had also tried to send LinkedIn requests to former colleagues looking for employment. David heard through the grapevine that most people in the industry had quietly blacklisted him. Tech was a small world, and betrayal like this traveled fast. Patricia entered without knocking, holding a folder. "The DNA suits are filed. Marcus Chen is officially established as the biological father of all 3 children. He'll be responsible for child support going forward, though given his current employment situation, I doubt Sarah will see much." David nodded. He was still providing for the children, of course. He'd set up trust funds for each of them, millions of dollars they could access when they turned 25. He paid for their private school, their activities, their college funds. Not because he had to, the courts had released him from any legal obligation, but because he loved them, because they didn't deserve to suffer for their mother's choices. "Any word from Sarah?" Patricia asked. "She requested supervised visitation next month. Emma doesn't want to see her yet. Lucas is willing to try. Sophie doesn't really understand why Mommy doesn't live with them anymore." David rubbed his temples. "This is going to take years to unpack, isn't it?" "Probably," Patricia agreed, "but you're doing the right thing. You're giving those kids stability, honesty, and love. That's more than most children in this situation get." David's computer chimed with a news alert. TechNova had just secured another major contract, their stock price climbing. The company he'd built from a Stanford dorm room was thriving. He should feel proud, accomplished, vindicated. Instead, he felt empty. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Chen, there's someone here to see you. She says it's personal." David exchanged a look with Patricia. "Send her in." The door opened, and Emma walked in, her school backpack slung over one shoulder. She was wearing the TechNova Junior t-shirt David had given her last year, back when she didn't know he owned the company. back when everything was still a lie. "Hi, Dad," she said, and the words still made David's heart ache with love and loss. "Hi, sweetheart. Shouldn't you be in school?" "Half day. Grandma dropped me off. I wanted to see where you work. Your real work." She looked around the office, taking in the expensive furniture, the awards on the wall, the evidence of success David had hidden for so long. "This is pretty cool." "Yeah?" David wheeled himself closer. "What do you think?" Emma sat on the couch, hugging her backpack. "I think you're kind of a superhero, not because of the wheelchair like Sophie says. Because you knew Mom was lying and you didn't tell us kids. You protected us from the bad stuff as long as you could." David's throat tightened. "I wish I could have protected you from all of it." "But you couldn't, because Mom made her choices and we got hurt anyway." Emma's voice was mature beyond her 10 years, aged by knowledge children shouldn't have to carry. "Mrs. Chen, the therapist, says it's okay to be mad at Mom and still love you. She says families are about choices, not just blood." Mrs. Chen is very smart. "Are you still our dad?" Emma asked, and David heard the fear underneath the question, the vulnerability of a child whose entire world had shifted. He opened his arms and Emma climbed into his lap like she used to when she was smaller. "Always," David whispered into her hair. "I chose you before. And I choose you now. You're my daughter. Lucas and Sophie are my children. Nothing will ever change that." Emma cried quietly against his shoulder, and David held her, this child who shared no DNA with him, but shared everything else. Memories, love, pain, hope. Outside the window, Seattle gleamed in the afternoon sun. Somewhere in this city, Sarah was probably figuring out how to explain to her friends why she'd left a billionaire. Marcus was probably applying for jobs and getting rejected. The three of them, Sarah, Marcus, and their choices, would have to live with the consequences. But here in this office, David had something they could never take away. He had Emma's trust, Lucas's tentative hope, Sophie's innocent love. He had the truth, finally out in the open after years of deception. And he had the knowledge that when the judge had read his net worth in that courtroom 3 months ago, when Sarah's face had drained of all color and her world had collapsed, David hadn't felt satisfaction or revenge. He'd felt free. The divorce papers were signed. The truth was told. The empire was his. And the children, his children, because he chose them, were learning that real family wasn't about biology or money or secrets. It was about showing up, telling the truth, and loving people even when it hurt. David kissed the top of Emma's head. "Want to see the server room? It's pretty cool if you're into computers." Emma wiped her eyes and nodded. "Can we get ice cream after?" "Absolutely." As they left the office together, David caught his reflection in the glass. A man in a wheelchair with his daughter's hand on his shoulder. Both of them moving forward into whatever came next. Sarah had laughed while signing the divorce papers, confident in her victory. But in the end, David had gotten something far more valuable than revenge. He'd gotten himself back.